So today's workshop is on how to get your clothing manufactured. In this presentation, I will cover how to source a factory, what to look for in your manufacturing partner, types of manufacturing environments, how to prepare for production, and also domestic versus offshore manufacturing. I'll go over the pros and cons of that. But before I get started, I have a special guest joining us today. I'd like to introduce Ben Christie, who's the owner of Vancouver-based garment factory Precision Design Group. Hi, Ben.
Hey, Glynis. Hey, everyone. Hope you're all doing well.
Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. So I have a presentation prepared, but feel free to jump in whenever you want. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about Precision?
Yeah, absolutely. So I took Precision over in October of 2020. We're probably a small to medium-sized knit manufacturing facility. So, we're pretty vertical in the sense that we do pattern drafting, we do your grading, we do your marker making, sample making, as well as production. You have most machinery that you could ever possibly dream of, minus anything that does, bonded, welded seams or seam sealing. But yeah, bread and butter clients are those that do, sweaters, t-shirts, hoodies, sweatpants, sort of the lifestyle stuff that you might see as loungewear. But yeah, our ideal order size is anywhere between 200 to 2,000 units. And that can be spread across a number of colors and sizes, so that's no problem at all. We sort of look at ourselves as having this beautiful little position within the Canadian manufacturing space where, we can accommodate new and emerging designers that, might not be able to meet those minimum order requirements of factories that you might see offshore or even domestically for that. So for those that are looking to not invest a ton into their inventory, which I always suggest for small startup brands, don't get too, bogged down by, the lowest price point, but you have to invest, 1,000 to 2,000 units for one style. We sort of fulfill that, that pain point for those that, just looking to sort of get started out, cut their teeth in this industry, and just do a little bit of market testing. And then, if it takes off, you're more than welcome to still stick with us. We're here to grow with you, but, the end goal is that, you end up producing 10,000, 100,000 units. So, we're also there to assist you with that. If you ever needed resources, directing you to those large scale manufacturers. But yeah, we have a real sweet spot in this city and in this country as well for that, that matter. But if you're ever looking to have knitwear or even just some woven sampling done, we're more than capable of doing that.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ben. And Ben has a lot of experience in this industry, and he can really help with your business, whether or not you are just starting out or ready to scale and grow. He's, like you said, he's there to help you just hopefully grow, right?
That's the beautiful thing about having your garments manufactured domestically. It's quite hands-on. A lot of these larger brands that are producing offshore, every season they'll send a team of designers to those factories to do exactly what you're able to do when you have the garment factory in your own city. It's that hands-on approach where any issues that need to be hashed out can be sort of hashed out on the spot without relying on supply chain issues, logistics issues. You can come straight to our factory and, we can iron out any fit requirements that you might have without, playing this game of tag between FedEx and yourself. So, it really helps you save on costs. It really speeds up to your go-to market by producing domestically. And, we're approachable. Everyone here also speaks English, so in terms of being on the same page with what your vision is, and I'm not just speaking for myself, I'm speaking for all the other local manufacturers as well. You know, there really is an advantage, a communication advantage to working with factories in this country. So yeah, you get this beautifully tailored personal experience when you're producing, you know, factories like us that you might not get unless you were producing massive quantities going offshore. So yeah, you know, definitely
Awesome.
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really glad that you're here to offer your advice and expertise in this session today. Um, this is actually the third session of my series of free business workshops for fashion entrepreneurs. I um, started in January of this year, giving these workshops. And the previous workshop I had walked through the product development process and all the steps leading up to production. And so this is just a quick little snapshot of the product development process. I'm not going to go over this too much today because I've already covered those in my first two workshops that I did earlier this year. And for anyone who has who missed that, you can watch the recordings on my YouTube channel. So I did product development planning, which covers a lot of the planning calendars and timelines. And then I did my last workshop was how to design for production. And that was like going over all the steps that led up to the pre-production to production process. So here we are today talking about manufacturing, and I'm just gonna perhaps go over my first slide talking about how to source a factory, because I find that this is really a question I hear a lot from new designers and design, brands looking to get their products made. They're like, where can I find a factory? And so there's several places where you can do that. And I mean, coming to the webinar today is definitely one of them, and being introduced, to factories in the city here, like Ben's factory. There's also trade shows out there, and trade shows that run throughout the year. And there's textile sourcing, I think, and Magic trade show that just happened last week. Magic sourcing happened, so there's a lot of manufacturers that attend those types of shows. They're very large shows, and sometimes it's like looking for a needle in a haystack type of thing. So, but at least that's one place you can go to look for manufacturers. Of course, there's people that you can talk to who are already working with factories, like pattern makers and fabric suppliers, right? So they're probably people that would know of different manufacturers that you can work with. So they could probably give you some names of people. There's also agents and consultants. Some factories have manufacturing agents up there that represent them, and consultants as well who work commission based, and they could perhaps direct you to the right type of factory. And of course, there's Google, largest search engine up there, to help you find what you need. There's also fashion schools, and your local fashion school is also a great place. It has different resources that you can ask and see if they have any information, resources, and that sort of thing. Oh, I should have trade shows in there twice. Just noticed that. Associations and organizations. We have a Canadian Apparel Federation here, and the US has CFDA. On their website, they actually have a list of resources, list of factories as well that you can contact. And I mean, sometimes I find associations, their list is sometimes not very up to date. But you can reach out to them and then perhaps, ask them if they know anyone who, produces, perhaps you're looking for uh, swimwear, any factory, if they know any factories that they can recommend if that's in your city. So there's also directories out there, different directories. At Makers Row, it's mostly American based, I believe, of different factories. It's not actually vetted. I think anyone who can create a profile on there and list their factory. So you need to pretty much, go through the vetting process of like actually checking them out first, and making sure that they can produce what you need them to do. And social media, there's a lot of different groups out there on Facebook groups. Here in Vancouver, we have the Vancouver Sustainable Fashion Designer Facebook group, which is very helpful, great resource for people to network, ask questions. There's a lot of industry professionals, brand owners, and so it's a great community there to really ask questions and really get the support that you need. And networking, of course, is something else like that's really important. Getting out there, perhaps talking to other people, um, and like seeing if they have any resources that they can share with you. And the last thing I have is competitors, question mark. Depending, some people are maybe not so open to share their information, but maybe some are. And it doesn't hurt to ask, I think. If, you can ask somebody perhaps where they get their stuff made, and if they can recommend a factory or manufacturer to help you produce things. So this is really, my list of where you can, different places where you can source a factory. Ben, do you have any other things you want to add to this list that maybe I might have missed? Or
No, that looks good to me.
yeah, I mean, it's always a hard thing. I find people saying that, oh, how do I find factories? Because a lot of times, like factories don't have websites, or it's like you can't really find them anywhere. It's kind of like more through word of mouth and that sort of thing. What do you do, Ben, like to sort of get the word out there in terms of like for your factory and for your business? Like, is there anything that you do in particular, or does it mostly like come from word of mouth? Or
Yeah, I'd say probably 95% of our business is through word of mouth. We'll occasionally post big news items on LinkedIn, and then through that, we find that occasionally communities will pick it up. But yeah, aside from that, I can't speak for where all the other participants are living, but in Vancouver, there's a Facebook group called the Vancouver Sustainable Fashion Designer Group. And we find that by sort of putting our name out there, by, posting the occasional ad for a machine, or, creating a bit of dialogue, people are starting to sort of pick up on us being a local manufacturer. And, once that sort of in the ether seems to get sort of talked about a little bit more amongst those communities. So I would say, yeah, Facebook and Reddit actually are really good for us, sort of where people tend to offer recommendations. We also have a pretty good SEO for our website. So if you were to Google, Vancouver garment manufacturers, for the longest time we were the number one result. We just updated our website, so it might have affected it, but you'll start to notice that a lot of garment factories in the lower mainland, they actually don't have as much of a business issue as some might think. A lot of them aren't really looking for the business, which can actually end up becoming a challenge for especially new unknown designers. So, speaking to that, I would probably offer this little bit of advice. When you're reaching out to a factory, whether that's in Canada, America, offshore, leave out the part that you're a startup. Don't say I'm just starting my own fashion line. Because the second that a factory hears that, it's a bit of a red flag in terms of what the quantity is going to be, as well as how that interaction is going to be with you. So try to keep it as, not as vague, but try to just leave out any red flags that, these factories might be able to see in your brand and poke holes in before they even accept you on as a client. Because, just as much as you need the factory, they need you, but they also need you to be trustworthy, and they need to know that they're actually going to, they're going to be profitable with you as well.
For the long term, right? Because
Yeah,
for a factory
exactly.
to work with you, it takes a lot of time, especially in the beginning. And so it's kind of like an investment, right? On their part.
Absolutely. Yeah. Every business relationship is very much like a human relationship. There's a bit of growing pains. You have to feel each other out, know how one another works, and there is a lot of unbillable hours that goes into client meetings and onboarding. So if a factory is bringing on someone that they might not necessarily know, and they don't know the track record of this company, they might be a little concerned to bring you on because again, like, they don't know what that order is going to lead to. Is it just going to be a one and done sort of order, or is it going to lead to future growth? So we take pride in the fact that our conversion rate for future orders is quite high, but because we're also we are selective over the clients that we do take on. We don't take on everyone. But that little tidbit of advice, just sort of leave out the fact that you're a startup brand in your pitch. Just keep it as blunt as possible, and try to reduce the introductory email. I'll get essays occasionally from people that will give me their business plan. And, all we are is just the manufacturer. We're not an investor. We don't need to know your financials and whatnot, but try to keep it strictly to bullet points when you're making an introduction to a factory, or even if you're looking for, a referral from someone. Just because a lot of these people don't have the time, unfortunately, to read through, a 10-paragraph email to offer a suggestion or bring you on as a client as well. So keep it lean. That's what I would say.
Yeah, lean and to the point.
To the point. Yeah, exactly. No fluff.
No fluff. No business plans.
We don't need to know how you're changing the world. That's fantastic and all, but we can discuss that later. We just want to know, essentially, what products you're looking to have done, what your quantities are, see whether or not it's even within our capabilities, and then we'll go from there. Then we'll have that, how to change the world discussion.
Yeah, because in the first email is really you're setting an impression as well, right? And the factory also needs to make sure that you are a right fit for them. So you don't want to be, coming out asking too many questions and this and that can create, some red flags that factory thinks that, oh, you're going to be a little bit too high maintenance or something, right? Or it's going to take up too much of their time, and you don't want to. I heard, from other factory owners as well, saying that, the thing that kind of, I guess a red flag is that when they approach them and they kind of seem like they're not sure what they want, and it's going to have to be a lot of hand holding, or they're expecting the factories to sort of teach them what they need to do. But you kind of need to come in at least know what you want, because the factory, if you don't know what you want, the factory is not going to know what you want, right? So that's one thing. And you need to really, take some time to educate yourself as well about this industry, about the process before going in. So at least you sound like you know what you're doing, right? And that you're not totally counting on the factory to be teaching you all this stuff, because that's not their job. Their job is to
Yeah,
produce, right?
yeah, exactly. Another question that sort of throws a lot of factories off as well is, when a client is reaching out to make that introduction, for someone to just ask, "What's your pricing?" Um, Pricing is probably the most flexible thing when it comes to manufacturing, or the whole manufacturing space. There's so many variables that play a part in that. The difficulty of the project, the number of units, the number of colorways that you're doing, your lead time. Those are all things that need to be considered. So if you just come out in your email saying like, what's your pricing? Factory is probably going to pick up on that right away and go, okay, well, this person has never done business with a factory before, because there are that many variables. So if you can give concrete metrics, I want 200 units or 500 units, t-shirt, 3 colorways in, 170 GSM jersey. You don't even need to get that specific, but if you just say like, hey, look, what would your ballpark be for, a typical t-shirt in jersey? If you can give any like construction details, like imagery is super, super helpful.
Yeah.
Just
A tech pack would
tech
that
pack.
help as well? Is it necessary, or?
That's a hot topic for debate. I know every factory has their own personal preferences in terms of what they would like to see for like a development package. I can speak for ourselves, and we find that unless you're a senior technical designer that can pull together a bulletproof tech pack, what we find is when we have our clients hiring cheap designers to draft tech packs for them, we find there's a ton of errors in them, and it actually creates a lot more work on our end to pick apart these missed details on pages. Most tech designers probably work with Excel, unless they work for a larger company where they'd be using what's called like a PLM system. But the problem with Excel is once you make one correction on one page, and you forget to make the correction on the next page, you have contradicting information that we end up needing to decipher, and then getting back to you and saying, hey, look, like you wanted a flat lock seam on your side seams on page 1, but in page 2 it says surge, and so it creates a lot more work for us. So we like to keep it really, as I said before, we like to keep everything as lean as possible. We love like 1 to 3 page tech packs where it has what's called your technical drawing or a flat on the front. It would have any specific call outs to construction on maybe page 2. And and then if you can give us a reference sample to base a fit on, that is our dream. We find that occasionally we'll get specs from clients, but a lot of people measure their garments differently, or they don't know how to measure, and what they call out in specs is very different from maybe what we would do on our end. So it just creates, again, like just we have to bill for that time, where we have to decipher your tech pack. It all goes into your sample making costs. And, it ends up costing everyone in the long run. So, we have no issues, and I can speak for a lot of other factories. If you have a very simple, lean spec page or detailed, a lean tech pack where it's 3 pages, we love that. And if you're going to put specs, put your key measurements down. So chest, hem, length, and it depends. If you're doing top or bottom, it really varies. But if we can work with a reference sample to base your block on, which is basically just your general fit. And then you give us comments on how to improve that fit or change that reference sample. We can Frankenstein 4 pieces into one. That's no problem at all. It's actually quite easy for us to do that. But if you just give us, a drawing and sort of rely on us to sort of come up with it from scratch, you might have to go through 4 to 6 rounds of prototyping. Whereas if you just gave us some reference samples and then some basic drawings, or you can even masking tape your samples with just some Sharpie on it. We can nail it. Sometimes 1 to 2 samples. So just keep it as clear and as simple as possible. I know for offshore, they tend to like to work with tech packs because it prevents any liability for the most part on their end. It also, a lot of these factories reside in countries where English is not their native language, so they need all that extra information so that their sampling is coming out more dialed in. I would say that also they need all that extra information as well because of the logistical issues. Like you're going to have to, you want to get it as right as possible that first sample. They would require a detailed tech pack because, when you ship 6 samples or 5 samples, like just in shipping alone, that's going to be over $1,000, so depending on where you're shipping from. So, that's, again, the beautiful thing about working domestically with people that live in your neighborhood, really. It's, we rely a heck of a lot less on all of that detail because you can communicate it to us in person.
Yeah, absolutely. The communication component is so important in all of this throughout the process, right? Because there is a lot of back and forth, especially in the beginning. And it's almost like I would recommend to do your product development domestically as opposed to offshore, because the fact that you're going to be there working with them like very closely and getting your prototypes fitted and approved, like you work very closely, and just it's hard if you're working with an overseas manufacturer. Most of them would need some kind of tech pack because the reason is I see a tech pack as like a communication tool, and between you and the factory, and any kind of changes that you make on the sample needs to be made on the tech pack, has to be reflected on the tech pack, and the tech pack has to be an accurate representation of the garment. So the measurements, the specs on your tech pack has to match your sample, your final sample that's going into production, and all the changes need to be documented on there. But you need to have a really good understanding of how a tech pack works, because like Ben said, it can almost cause more, there's room for confusion, more errors, right? If you've got a sample and a tech pack that don't match. So that's another, advantage of working with a local factory, because the local factories sometimes don't even need tech packs, right? If you have a really good sample, like Ben said, a reference sample, a sample just to start with that he can work off of, even if it has, notes and sticky taped on, pinned to it, but you at least have something that you can follow, is gonna like at least get you ahead, instead of like, oh, just a sketch and then them having to like figure it all out and work it all out. Someone had asked a question, can you give an example of first call or email script? Like, I think we talked a bit briefly about that and what to say in your first intro email. I mean, be very just straightforward to the point as you can. You don't need to get into all the stuff describing, what your business model is, but you can just say something like, hello, my name is Glynis, and I am the founder or owner of, an ABC fashion company, and I would like to produce I'm looking to produce, 250 pieces of this, like a pullover top that's made out of, 100% French terry, and just wondering what the lead time would be on that. Is that something that would work, Ben? Like just very straightforward to the point. Like I'm looking to make this. I'm looking to make this many pieces. This material. This is the style, and sort of, what is the lead time? Is that generally that would work, right?
Yeah. Just say, hi there. I'm interested in, my name is blah, blah, blah. I work for company ABC, or I own company ABC. I'm interested in expanding my domestic production. Are you taking on new clients? A lot of factories don't become unmotivated if you get a rejection from a few factories. A lot of them are at full capacity and aren't taking on any new clients. Fortunately, we live in a society where there just aren't as many skilled sewing machine operators as we require. So we're sort of at the mercy of the labor market right now. So some factories have just outright, they put on pause and accepting any new clients, but there still are like quite a few manufacturers around, the Vancouver and Toronto area, especially. It might be some in Winnipeg. Los Angeles has a really good community as well. But yeah, make the introduction. Just say, hey, I'm looking to have 250 units of, the following style. You could even give it doesn't even need to be your finished product. You could just give even like a reference image of like a competitor sample that's somewhat in line with what you foresee your product looking like. It'll at least allow the factory to gauge whether or not it's a good fit for them. There's certain things that we don't even touch, like denim, for instance. We won't touch that. We've slowly been moving away from doing wovens. So anything non-stretch, we just with our existing workforce, it just makes more sense for us to do knitwear. But every factory will have its own niche, right? So maybe just first ask whether or not the following product is possible within their realm, if it's something that they'd be interested in taking on, and then just sort of put the ball in the factory owner or the, whoever you're speaking to, the sales reps court, and allow them to get back to you. Again, like too much information. If you're sending like a 4-page essay, sometimes they won't even read it. So if you can just keep it clean and just straight to the point, and just keep it quite open-ended, find that generally works. We like to see an image, quantity. We have clients ask us all the time if we're accepting, new clients. At this moment, we still are, but I would say keep it to those few points for your introduction email, and then allow that dialogue to build up from there.
For sure. So I'm just gonna go over some manufacturing terminology here, because some things have get thrown out, and these are common manufacturing terminology that we use. So MOQ, it stands for minimum order quantity. That's an industry term that most manufacturers use to talk about production minimums. Tech packs, which includes a garment spec sheet and has body measurements and an area called the bill of materials that has all the details and trim information, including a sketch, at least a front and a back with additional details attached to it. Usually has a comment section as well. Pattern making, so that involves creating pattern blocks that's used to produce the garment. Garment has pieces that need to be cut and sewn together, so patterns need to be made for those pieces to be able to be cut out and then stitched together. And then grading is when you are sizing the patterns up or down. the measurements that you put in from each size goes up by a certain amount in measurements. And that's typically indicated on the spec sheets. And markers are what the cutters at the factory use to cut out the pattern pieces when it comes to production. So factories usually need all these things before they start the production. The markers, usually what happens after they take the graded patterns and then they put them all like Tetris it and to create the highest yield. So there's less wastage when it comes to cutting, because they're not going to just lay out patterns, randomly when they're cutting. They want to fit the pieces in as tightly as possible so that there's the least amount of wastage when it comes time to cutting. Okay, so these are important terminologies. Someone's just asking a question about how do you recommend designers to update and revise patterns for next production? If, say, I work in paper and fabric while factory has them in Gerber. So if the factory is working with a CAD system and you're working with, I guess, paper and fabric, I mean, it depends. Like Ben's factory uses the Gerber system. I think are you using Gerber or Electra?
We use
Electra, sorry.
Very, very similar.
Yeah, similar. It's a type of pattern making system. There's Electra and Gerber are the biggest ones. So what do you say about that? Like if someone comes to you with paper patterns, then do you go and digitize them? Or can you work with paper patterns like directly into?
So we do have a digitizing table. So anytime a client of ours will bring in paper patterns, we will essentially scan them into our system. I'd like to note though that there's a huge difference between home pattern drafting and production ready pattern drafting. So, for instance, when I went to fashion school, the pattern drafting that they taught us and the seam allowances that they taught us are quite different from the seam allowances that we'd actually use at our facility. We run really efficiently. And so our in-house pattern drafting team, what they'll do is once we've digitized your patterns into our system, we'll actually do like a once over just to make sure that everything actually fits and makes sense. We get a lot of patterns that, home sewers can make work, but yeah, in terms of production, there are a lot of challenges that our team faces with some of the patterns that we receive. So we will edit those. And, you'll actually find that once they've been digitized, put into our system, and then made so that they're production ready, a lot of the times it actually makes more sense just to have us correct whatever you need to correct on our end versus us print out your pattern, have you edit at home, which you're more than welcome to do, but we still have to reload that back into our system by digitizing it. And it's a cost that does add up, especially if you have quite a few pattern pieces. So if you're doing a t-shirt, it's not the biggest deal, but once you get into really complex pieces that have, 20, 25 pattern pieces, unique pattern pieces, that's where the cost really starts to add up. So our pattern drafting is billed by the hour. Our pattern drafting team has been doing this for 30 plus years each, so they've got a ton of experience under their belt. So making these changes that, you perceive being needed, it's actually quite simple on our end. And then once we've adjusted your patterns, you own that. You're more than welcome to take the digital file home. We can also print it out as an added service if you'd like. But yeah, versus you drafting the pattern, us digitizing it, and then us printing it out for you to edit back at home, I would say just sort of leave it with the experts and maybe focus more on your brand and building the business side of things. Because we find we do run into a lot of issues when people start, and I'm generalizing, don't get me wrong, there's people out there that are incredible pattern drafters that are more than capable of doing it. But we do find that, yeah, when people do edit their own patterns, there are a lot of things that we have to fix, and then those those edits end up actually
Adding up. And I've heard from many pattern makers that say they don't actually like to work on other people's patterns. They rather start from scratch, because it's just a lot of headache to take a pattern from someone, or someone else started, and then you take it to someone else, and then they're like, no, they rather just start from scratch, because they have their own way of doing it. And probably same goes for you as well. So like someone says, can they work in AI? Well, it's a special file, right? That's I don't think it's not an AI file. It's probably not compatible to that. It's like, what's the file name? Yeah, DMX. There's a universal file name that like can be translated across like the different systems between like Lectra, Gerber, like Optitext, I think is like another one. Like, is there a universal file?
Yep. So it's called DXF actually. So DXF is your DXF. Yeah. So that's your base pattern CAD. DXF files they don't necessarily only apply to apparel. They can apply for metalwork, woodworking, anything that might take a CNC machine. But DXF is traditionally the industry standard that tends to work across all platforms. And the DXF file is an ungraded file. So that is just your base size. And then if you, for whatever reason, wanted to grade it, that DXF file is going to be attached to what's called a .rul file. And .rul is just short for rule, which means grade rules. So that DXF and that .rul file work in tandem. You actually import both into a software at the same time, and that gives you your graded pattern. There's also Gerber AccuMark files that a lot of pattern drafters are, pretty familiar with. Those are actually converted to a .zip file.
And they can be emailed to you, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't have if someone's trying to get their patterns from a manufacturer and you don't have the system, you can still get the manufacturer to email them to you, and you can email it like wherever, and then to someone who can open it.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say if you can get the DXF, the .rul file from whoever's doing your pattern drafting, and if it's possible, if they're doing it in Gerber, try to get the Gerber.zip file as well. There's quite a few different pattern drafting softwares out there right now. There's Optitext. We use a software called Medeiros, which is owned by Lectra. There's Gerber AccuMark. There's there's a new emerging software called Clo out there, but they've all been quite independent from one another, and they all have their own nuances in terms of what they can import and what they can export. So for instance, we find that the newer software like Clo, for instance, you can still export to a .dxf file or and with a .rul. The problem is it's such a new piece of software that the older pattern drafting softwares out there don't recognize it or don't recognize those file types entirely. So we find that they're quite glitchy. So just be forewarned that if you're working with a really new up and coming software that hasn't quite been adopted by the industry, you might run into some issues, especially if you're sending it to like a legacy factory that works on Gerber or Medeiros, for instance, or Optitext. You might have some some import issues. So just be careful with that. Worst case, in situations where we just cannot read the files, we'll actually have our clients, they'll have their factories or whoever did their patterns print the pieces out, and then we'll just digitize them into our system. So that's sort of like a worst case situation, but I'd say 98% of the time, the files, we can make them work.
Awesome. So let's just talk about how, in terms of choosing a factory that you need, that you need. Like we sort of talked about this a little bit in our conversation, because Ben mentioned, what he specializes more and what he doesn't do. Like he doesn't touch denim. That mostly has to do probably with the type of equipment and machinery that you need. So that's why when you're choosing a factory, you got to make sure you are choosing the right factory as well. And so some of the things you need to look at is, well, you need to decide whether or not you require a CMT or a full package factory, right? So CMT stands for cut, make, trim. So typically with that, you would be purchasing the materials, fabrics, and have those delivered to the factory, and then have the production done by your contractors. Full package program would mean that the factory pretty much do everything for you. So they would source the materials as well as produce the finished goods. And there's also a half package program. So either you would be purchasing or providing the materials, and then have the product development done and production done by the contractors. So there's different types of factories out there, so that you need to be aware of that. And of course, other considerations would be the location of the factory, whether or not it's domestic or overseas, the size, capacity of the factory, because not all factories can handle small run production, and not all factories can handle huge, giant orders, right? So, I think Ben's factory is like a medium-sized factory. You can handle, like, what's your capacity?
It really depends on the project.
Yeah.
If we're doing t-shirts, for instance, we can do upwards of probably 2,000 units in a month. Obviously, if you're doing something that's a lot more complicated, a million different pattern pieces, that's significantly going to reduce whatever output that we're able to commit to. So, I would say typically anywhere between like the 200 to 1,500 unit order range is probably our sweet spot. Anything over and above that, I think it requires, a conversation as to whether or not you want to continue having your stuff made domestically, because there are fewer factories that are capable of producing quantities, in like the 10,000 unit range. And a lot of them actually aren't taking on new clients. So it could be up for discussion as to whether or not you want to explore moving your production outside of the country. Doesn't necessarily need to be in Asia or or India, Bangladesh. You can also still keep it near-shored, which means exploring the U.S. or Mexico, for instance, or even down in America.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something you need to keep in mind, the factory's capacity in terms of the quantities that they can handle. And most factories overseas will require a lot larger orders, especially like countries like Cambodia, Vietnam. They would entertain orders of less than, like in Vietnam, I think had to be minimum of 1,000. The MOQ. Cambodia was 3,000 MOQ. Because I was working with the factory over there. So they're set up to do like huge orders, right? And also the thing to consider is the fabric structure, type of fabric that you're using, whether it's a knit or woven. Most factories specialize in either one or the other. They can because knits require different machinery than woven fabrics do. Okay, so if you want to sew something with a knit, that you need a flat lock machine. That's a special machine that the factory needs to have that in order to produce those knit garments. And then product specialty, I guess, goes back to the type of products that they specialize in. And, factories that need, if it's hard to find, one of the more challenging things is lingerie, like swimwear, that type of product. You really need a specialized factory to be able to make those type of products. So these are things you need to be aware of when you're deciding on factory to work with. Here, I kind of already talked about the types of manufacturing environments, but these are very common, type of manufacturing environments you need to be aware of. Typically, domestic productions do CMT, and they may not include packaging, hang tagging, poly bagging, packing as well. And sometimes factories charge extra for that, whereas full package programs usually do everything from start to finish. And most factories overseas would be doing a full package. Like they would provide the material, order the fabric, cut, make, sew it, package it, and ship it to you like completely finished. But that's usually they charge you an FOB price. And then the other type of manufacturing environment would be a vertical integration. And that typically means that a company would do their everything in-house. So from designing to distribution. So vertically integrated company would design, perhaps do their fabric sourcing and manufacturing and distribution, and perhaps even retail, all in-house. And then there's also some different, variations like design, sourcing, distribution, and then they would outsource their production. And I used to work at Reebok, and Reebok was this model where they did all the designing in-house and the sourcing, but they would outsource their manufacturing and production, and then everything would get shipped to their warehouse for distribution. So these are the typical types of manufacturing environments. And I actually covered this in my last workshop in terms of the things that need to get passed to factory. So this is a list of things that usually you need to give to a factory before you start production. You need to give them a purchase order, tech packs, depending, like what we had talked about. You may or may not need a tech pack, but if it's overseas, usually you do. Order sheet, a cut sheet, usually is used for a CMT type factory. Samples, patterns, markers, your fabric, trims, like the zippers, buttons, hooks, etc. Your labels, hang tags, and packaging. Any packaging that you have, you need to make sure that you give these all to factory before they even start production. Okay, and just the last thing I want to talk to you about was the difference between domestic versus offshore manufacturing and what the pros and cons are. So we did talk a little bit earlier about, the pros of domestic production being, convenient, they're closer to you, there's no customs, obviously you'll be supporting local business. It's a lot faster to get your production here because you don't have the delivery, extra shipping lead times that go into overseas production, and also the ability to make smaller quantities, right? Because when you're starting out, you don't want the risk of having too much inventory. And this is a mistake that a lot of small businesses make, is they think, well, they're getting a better price if they make more, right? But you haven't tested it out yet. And without knowing, how your product's going to perform, how your sales are going to be, it's very risky to go and make a lot of inventory because it's going to tie up all your cash flow. And the problem with a lot of small businesses, why they fail is because they run out of cash, right? So in the beginning, you need to be very careful in terms of your cash flow and inventory. And one way to do that is to make less and produce smaller quantities, even though the cost may be higher, but you don't have the risk of running out of money. So the cons would be, higher labor costs, raw material issues, since, we don't produce a lot of fabrics and raw materials in North America. There's very few mills left in this country, so most have to be imported. Lack of technology. So I think in terms of the technology in Asia and other countries have better technology in those types of manufacturing countries, because technology is expensive, right, to invest for a factory to be able to always upgrade and invest in that. Lack of skilled labor is an issue that we are facing here in North America, Canada, and the US because of the aging population of workers. It's, in the next 5-10 years, a lot of the workers are going to be retiring and leaving the industry. And there's really a shortage right now of finding skilled workers, sewers, machine operators, cutters, right? That sort of thing. So that's a bit of an issue. And also outgrowing the factory. So that was something we also talked about. So as your business grows and your sales grow, your orders need to grow and increase, then you may need to look at a different factory to handle your production. So the pros of offshore manufacturing would be higher volumes, that they're able to handle that, their greater capacity. Factory handles everything. So like I said earlier, most of the factories in overseas, they do everything for you. You just give them a little purchase order and they'll order the materials and do everything, and you receive the finished good. You'll have global benefits like access to raw materials, lower labor costs, and better machinery. And the cons of offshore manufacturing would be higher MOQs, higher minimums, less control because, you're not there to see what's going on. So you rely, more on that communication. And the added costs of the shipping, couriers, duties, everything that you import into the country requires you to clear customs, so you need a customs broker, and duties have to be assessed on top. And I've had products where I've had made overseas and imported to the country. I think they're just like fleece hoodies, but the duty was 28%. So it depends on the type of product, but it can be quite costly in the end, so you need to really factor that in, because really, by making it overseas, is it really saving you money? Because once you factor in the shipping, all the duties and brokerage and stuff like that, it may actually be more beneficial for you to produce domestically. And you have the longer lead times, you're talking about perhaps 3 to 6 months as well for overseas production. And of course, communication, right, is really important in all of this. And that's why I really do recommend, doing all your product development, at least that domestically, until you have that all worked out and you're happy with, the product, the samples, and you're like, okay, now I'm ready, to perhaps outsource. But it's going to save you a lot of headache in the long run, with all the back and forth and all that stuff, and sampling and shipping, and there's a lot of costs associated with that. So these are all the pros and cons of domestic versus offshore manufacturing. I have experience in working with both over the years. I mean, I have over 20 years experience in fashion. I've worked for a lot of big companies like Club Monaco, Hudson's Bay Company, and Reebok was my last job. I was a product manager there, and I was in charge of, overseeing all the product for the Canadian division of our licensed apparel line. And I worked with a lot of overseas factories and for our production and stuff. And, communication really is a huge thing, writing emails to them, get phone calls. I've even had to draw diagrams, illustrations, because they were not getting it right, no matter what I did or said or whatever. You just had to do whatever it takes, right? In order to communicate the things that you need, the changes and that sort of thing. So I guess before we get to your questions, one last thing I wanted to say in terms of, your relationships with your vendors are so important. To me, I treated my vendors, my factories, because I also had a clothing company I ran for 10 years. So after I left Reebok, I started my own clothing brand. It was very niche. It was a line of clothing that was inspired by Japanese animation and pop culture. But I started producing my line domestically with a local factory. I actually was first sewing my own stuff on my kitchen table. I was sewing my own stuff. Then I went and found a home sewer to help me. And then my orders grew, and I outgrew the home sewer, and I had to go and find a factory that this factory is like, they were in Toronto. They had like a computerized cutting machine and sewing. And in the beginning, I really had to convince them to take me on as a customer, right? And I was still fairly new, maybe 6 months into the business, but I was getting sales. And I was able to prove that I had demand for my product. And, although my orders may have been maybe couple hundred pieces, I was really confident knowing that I was able to sell this and was able to grow. And so they took me on. And yeah, I was stuck with them for almost the entire duration of my business, almost 10 years. And I also then worked with some offshore manufacturers as well for some of my other products. But going back to the relationship that you build with these vendors, I mean, I have to say, they're like a family to you. You treat them with respect, be kind, and because they're like family to you. And it's like sometimes, the things happen and you really need a factory to help you out if you're stuck in a situation. And if the little kindness goes a long way, and they'll are more willing to help you out if your interactions and everything throughout the process has been really smooth, and that you have a relationship with them. So that's what I have to say. Ben, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say pay on time. That's a huge,
For sure.
that's a huge deal for manufacturers. If you pay on time, if you pay right away, it instantly puts a good taste in your vendor's mouth. And I mean, you can also do little things to stand apart from other clients. We have people on occasion, for instance, during the Lunar New Year, they came in with some mandarin oranges for the sewers. And it was such a small gesture, but it completely went above what, you know, our expectations are from our traditional clients. But because of that, you know, like Dennis was saying, you know, build these relationships that are very similar to family relationships, where you would actually go out on a limb for clients, and you might go over and above by, you know, doing something that you might not typically do. Treat your vendors with respect. They'll treat you with respect. And if you go, if you make it an effort to build a really strong, friendly relationship with these vendors, asking for like small favors on occasion, you know, it's not as much of an issue. You know, I'm happy to take on, you know, on things that we might not normally take on, you know, as like a once in a lifetime project. If like that client has been really respectful, you know, they pay on time.
Pay on time.
They treat our staff with respect, and they don't create that many headaches, because it just takes one bad experience for the manufacturer to not want to do business with you again. You know, people in this industry, it's a human business, right? You know, very rarely are you having purely robotics manufacturing your clothing. So there's someone on the other end of that, and on occasion, you know, things do go wrong once in a while. You know, I'd like to think they hardly happen at all, which is our case over here. But on occasion, you know, there are things that might slip through the cracks, and this goes for all factories. So in those types of situations, rather than, you know, saber rattling and screaming at the factory, build this dialogue on how the problem can be fixed. There's usually almost always a solution, and you just have to sort of come to a compromise on what that is. Every scenario is different, but you know, rather than just screaming at the phone at, you know, whoever the factory production manager is, you know, come in, have a meeting, and discuss, you know, what those issues are. You can usually figure out a compromise that, you know, will leave both parties happy. So I would say that, and also manage your expectations based on what your order is, and order size. So if you're only ordering 20 units or 30 units from a factory, or, I mean, anything actually less than 200 units for us, for instance, if you're, I got to be delicate with this, because if you're only putting in an order for like 200, or sorry, for like 30 units, but you're treating the order as if it's like a multi-million-dollar order, and you're calling the factory every 5 seconds and wanting to shoot video at the shop, and, you know, really create a disruption for the SO team. I think you just need to manage your expectations of maybe the level of communication you might get. Like, we'll always answer any pressing issues. That's no problem at all. But I would say just manage expectations, also based around price point as well. You know, there is an unbelievable amount of time that is required for project discovery, as well as onboarding the team on how to construct. So sure, you might look at a t-shirt, like put in a 50-unit t-shirt order and go, well, why, you know, why aren't they charging $7? You know, why is it costing me $20 a shirt? But, you know, when we have to factor in the amount of equipment setup that's required, you know, the cutting time takes a lot, the spreading of the fabric, teaching the team on how to sew those pieces, and also sourcing your thread. We source thread, elastic fusing, and Mobilon for our clients, and that's included in the price. But if you have a really unique color, we need to go out and source that thread, so we have to pad that into the price. So you'll notice that as you reduce your volume, pricing does go up exponentially, and it's just to justify all that extra labor that we need to do regardless. The difference between spreading 50 t-shirts to 500 really is it's marginal. Like it pretty much requires the same amount of labor. So when you break that down per unit, the price does increase significantly. So manage your expectations of pricing, and then also manage your expectations of how hands-on you're going to be with like the smaller orders.
That's great advice for sure. Yeah, managing your expectations, I think that's a really big one. And um, you got to keep in mind that factories are run by people, the humans, behind the machine. Like what the fashion industry is the most labor intensive industry. Like we still haven't found a way to replace humans with machinery, or it's not fully automated yet. It still requires people to do a lot of the work, and so there's always a person behind it, and of course there's human error that happens, right? And so in all my years working in production, I've seen mistakes happen. First order, second order, repeat orders, and you're wondering, wow, how can this even happen? But it does happen, and I've seen it. And the thing is, like, but going yelling at the person is not going to really do anything. It's not going to help them. If anything, is going to, make things worse. It's like Ben said, the thing to do is to talk to them, find a way to figure it out and to work it out. How can we fix this? And how can we, what can we do next time to make it better? It's always, I find, there's a lot of problem solving and troubleshooting in this business, and just being patient and being able to work it out and finding the solutions to it. In the end, you come out better because you depend on factory depends on you as much as you depend on the factory, and so that's why this relationship is really important, because I don't think there's a perfect factory out there. I've worked with so many, and there's different issues. One may have one issue with something, and you think, like, I've actually moved to another factory one time thinking, I'm like, oh, I'm having the same issue all the time. I went to another factory, moved all my production there, and there was another different issue that was completely different. I was not even expecting it. I'm like, oh my goodness. And what happened was I was making a product out of polar fleece, and that factory ended up a polar fleece has a right side and a wrong side. Well, they ended up cutting everything and sewing everything with the right side facing up. And I was like, oh my goodness, everything was made like that way. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I went back to the other factory, my old factory after that. But I'm just saying, these things happen throughout production. So you can't always blame the factory for things. And the best thing to do is just to work it out, find ways of correcting it. And, and a good factory will want to work with you on that, I think, right?
Yeah. I would, you can also create this mental diagram in your head where it's a triangle, and at one corner it says cheap, the other corner it says fast, and the other corner it says good quality. You're never going to get all three. You have to pick two. So be realistic about that as well. You might find a factory that can produce your CMT for 20% cheaper, but just know that they're producing it at 20% cheaper for a reason. And that might just be they're ripping through it without actually looking at the construction and QCing every step of the way. Or if you you want something that's going to be I don't know. We sort of fall into the category where we're really good quality and we're fast. You know, we're not the cheapest factory by any stretch, but at the same time, you know, we take a lot of pride in the fact that, you know, what we're producing hardly ever has any flaws. Our stitches are very even. We really stand by our quality. But yeah, just know that, you know, you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Really, you can only expect so much for a certain price point. And also understand too that, you know, depending on the factory size, they have to commit to a certain amount of overhead as an expense. And you know, if you've been working with a home sewer where their overhead literally is like their own rent, or like their overhead's actually just their electricity bill, really. They don't have to really pad that into their price, so they can compete at a much cheaper level than what you might expect at a factory. But yeah, there's all things to consider with that. Also know too that if you have different parties working on your project, kind of turns into a game of telephone, we find. You know, if you have someone that's doing your markers, if you have a different person that's doing your patterns, if you have a different company that's doing your samples and another one that's doing your manufacturing, yeah, you run into this game of telephone where your processes and the opportunity for human error increases significantly. So try to find a factory that, you know, tries to at least offer a few options. So, you know, if you can find somewhere that does like your
I
sample
agree with that.
as well as your
Having your like patterns and samples all made in the same location.
Yeah, exactly. Because we have a few clients that they'll just use us for sampling, and then they'll go to another factory for their manufacturing, and you know, they'll come back to us going, why is my manufacturing so different from the approved samples? But it's because we're not the ones producing them. You know, they're bulk production.
Yeah, and sample sewing is different than production sewing.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Because sample sewing, they're only making one piece at a time. Production sewing, there could be several people working on the same piece, just producing the different parts and components and then putting it all together. And so you can't look at sample making as the same as production. And that's why, like, I 100% agree with Ben, so trying to find a place that does it all, you know, in one location, less the different contractors you have to work with, the better. Because I had this situation where I was getting my pattern made by one place and my sample made by somewhere else. And then I think those two definitely need to be done by the same person, at least in the same location. Because how can you have a sample maker and a pattern maker not in the same location? Because when the sample sewer is sewing your samples, they need to communicate those changes to the pattern maker, any changes that happen in the sampling. So I was the one running in between the sample maker and the pattern makers and telling them, like, but it wasn't working. So they need to work together in one location, and then having your production, you know, by another or in the same place as well. That's going to reduce a lot of headache.
Yeah. I also wouldn't keep out on having your patterns done properly. Yeah. You know, and I've been in this situation before as well, where, you know, I can have a student draft my pattern that says they're fully confident at doing it, and you know, they might be really talented in their fashion program, but they still haven't really adjusted to how things are done on the manufacturing side, and those patterns end up becoming quite difficult for us to use. So I'd probably, if you are going to go the route of like hiring on a professional pattern maker to do your patterns, that is a contractor outside of the factory that you're working at, maybe just make sure that they are doing industrial quality patterns. And, you know, generally if they have like a proven track record of, you know, 15, 20, 30 years, under their belt, they should be okay. But I can't stress it enough. Like a home pattern is so different than something that's ready for production. So yeah, so don't cheap out on that. Also know too that typically sample sewers are the most skilled sewers at a factory. They can do most of the processes, but with that, you will get a level of quality that is generally it's of like the highest level we find, just from what we've seen at other factories. An expectation that you might want to manage. You'll get this. We see it with wovens all the time from other factories where, yeah, their reference sample is beautiful, their production's off. You just have to know that the sew team that's doing your production generally has quite a bit less experience than that sample sewer. It's like an elite position in a factory. So just know that it might not be exact. There are tolerances though that every factory needs to abide by, especially if they're defined by the brand or the client that's working with them. They need to be realistic tolerances, but there is a bit of variation or opportunity for variation from the approved upon sample. So just know that, yeah, what you might get in production might be slightly different than the sample, but it still needs to conform to a certain quality standard.
Absolutely. If you have any questions for either myself or Ben, please type them in the chat.